For mobility professionals, this is Inside Intertraffic.
Welcome to our latest podcast from the world's biggest series of transport events, as today on Inside Intertraffic we discuss transport and the environment. This is Paul Hutton with another Inside Intertraffic podcast as we keep up with our conversation while we wait for the 23rd to 26th of March next year, when we'll get together in the Rai in Amsterdam. If there's been any upside to the coronavirus crisis, it was the fall in emissions related to transport as people travelled a lot less. And while public transport ridership is still in crisis, other changes have taken place that are being seen to possibly have long-term benefits, such as more walking and cycling, and a rise in home working, meaning less commuting. What does all this mean to transport, and how do electric vehicles fit into the mix? We discuss with one of the world's leading academics and two men key to a low carbon future on today's Inside Intertraffic.
This is Inside Intertraffic.
Now, I mentioned home working in my introduction there, and there's a belief that the days of everyone travelling 5 days a week to their office are over. If they're able to work remotely, they will at least some of the time. So how does that affect transport, and what other lessons from COVID can we draw when it comes to the environment? Professor Margaret Bell of Newcastle University in England has been researching transport and the environment for decades now, raising concerns pretty much before anyone else had even noticed. I caught up with her on a recent ITS UK webinar where we discussed a range of issues, starting with whether home working really does deliver the benefits we think it might.
If we manage the trips that are most detrimental to the environment to work at home, that's good. But you have to remember, some research that we did showed that on average, the people, if you worked at home and had to use electricity and gas, you were more likely on average to use 75% more energy and therefore increase your contribution to carbon dioxide 75% more than what you would save by not going into work. So there's this balance of being at home, making short trips and using the heating. You are actually more detrimental to CO2, although you're improving local air quality in the city because your car is not on the road.
People actually have done what they've been told through this, and with the environmental issues that we as a planet are facing, can you see a point where actually we're going to be able to say to people, I'm sorry, you just can't travel? It's not that when you're not allowed to at the moment, but you can book a certain amount of travel, and apart from that you're just going to have to stick in your local area. Is this setting a precedent for having a much stronger transport policy in the future that actually, rather than trying to change modes, actually limits how much people move around?
Paul, I have been advocating that for years. As you know, some of the work we've done to 5-6 years ago clearly showed an absolute need to reduce the number of vehicle kilometres travelled if we're going to get anywhere near reducing emissions by 67% of carbon dioxide by 2050 over 2010 levels. And yes, it does need a radical change in travel behaviour. Yes, a switch to public transport was the main vehicle for getting more people travelling with reduced carbon, because a bus full does give less emissions per person in terms of carbon dioxide. But notwithstanding that, you still need to reduce the need to travel. I know for a fact I've been talking about this for 10 years or more now. We do need to limit travel, and the best way to do that is to change land use and get people to live closer to where they work. Yes, I also understand that not, everybody wants to be working in high-rise buildings in the middle of a city, but that is, in some respects, more sustainable. Changes in the way we plan our cities is very important component for the future, in the sense that, we're building housing estates, think how that housing estate can attract people who can work in the local vicinity within cycle distance, and actually provide public transport that, if it's necessary, which will enable that community to get to where they work.
What's your recommendation to a transport manager to work out what to do in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, a year, how we can deliver something that remains sustainable and draws on the benefits that we've found in this very bizarre months that we've been living through?
As an operator, if I was wanting to stay in business, I would be looking to be more collaborative and more cooperative, work in a more cooperative way. I would be looking for opportunities to work, with companies and find out where their services could be timed so that they can match the uses of the public transport. Maybe working with the hospitals to understand whether particular times for clinics can be matched with particular bus times, so that they don't sort of necessarily just put on a bus service. They actually begin to look at the type of passengers and the passenger needs, and then change their services in a way where it will meet demand.
That's Professor Margaret Bell there of Newcastle University with her views on the future of transport and the environment. And just a reminder that this podcast isn't the only way you can keep up to date with the debate around transport. We're having an Intertraffic webinar on the 29th of September at 2 o'clock in the afternoon Central European time about connected road users need connected road networks. Join us for that, or if you're listening to this after the 29th, you can watch the replay on the Intertraffic website.
For mobility professionals, this is Inside Intertraffic.
Now, one thing we didn't touch on when we spoke to Margaret just now was low carbon vehicles. So let's dig into alternative sources during our next 2 interviews. My colleague Kevin Boris picked up the topic with a couple of guests.
And thanks, Paul. And today I've been joined by Neil Wallace, who is Head of Communications at the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, otherwise known as LOWCVP. Neil, first of all, I'm going to ask you the obvious question in a minute, but before, maybe some of our listeners aren't familiar with what LOWCVP does and is. Can you give them a bit of background?
Yeah, absolutely. Be happy to. Well, the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, we were established around about 15 years ago, 2000, well, in fact, longer than that, 17 years now. Time's flying. We're a public-private body. We deal with governments and with industry in the policy space. And our mission is to accelerate the low carbon shift, so the shift to electric vehicles and vehicles, reducing emissions in all ways. We focus on both vehicles and on the fuel side.
So, in terms of membership and your structure, how does LOWCVP actually work?
Yeah, as you rightly say, the LOWCVP is a membership organisation. We've got over 200 member organisations now, many very active members who work across a range of working groups in the area of road transport.
Yeah.
We very closely involved with government, so we have the ear of government. Our members have the opportunity to interface directly with people at the heart of the policy making process. Representatives of all sectors of industry are involved. We have academia, we have road user groups, and NGOs as well involved in the community. So, as I say, the LOWCVP is a membership organisation, and new members are always welcome to take a look at our website for further details.
And we'll talk about that website. We'll list it at the end, and it will also be in any text that you see accompanying this podcast. You'll find the links. Okay, thanks, Neil. So the obvious question I'm asking is we're going to have to talk about COVID-19, because this is one of the reasons why we're doing these podcasts, is because Intertraffic Amsterdam in April was postponed until next March for obvious reasons. So you look at America, the last 6 months, sales of recreational vehicles have gone up exponentially. It's extraordinary. I guess people can't go on holiday, they can't fly to the other side of the country, and they're buying recreational vehicles. They're spending $60,000-$70,000 on RVs to holiday in. How is that being reflected in the electric vehicle sector? Is there been like a trend that people are now buying more cars, they're spending more time at home, still on furlough, whatever, but there seems to be money available for people to buy cars. Is that the same with EVs?
Well, I'm interested to hear you say about the growth in sales of recreational cars, but in the UK certainly it's not been the case that we've seen. In fact, we've seen a big reduction over the course of the lockdown, and there has been something of a rebound since we began coming out of lockdown. But significant hits to most of the market, but the electric vehicle market has actually been particularly resilient. We've got a rapid increase in the number of available models of all types, from large battery vehicles with big ranges, the luxury segments, SUVs. So we, in terms of electric vehicles, absolutely sales have been pretty resilient, but the market has taken a big hit. At least here in the UK, we're about 40% down. In cars and vans, trucks and buses have been even more badly affected. Yeah. So we were talking in the last episode of Inside Intertraffic. I spoke to Sergio Fernandez from Madrid's public transport company, and he was saying that so it's not really a benefit. The wonders of COVID is that ideas have been put through and actually sort of developed and implemented really quickly. Where in the past it'd be 2 years from someone comes up with an idea, it's implemented in Madrid in a public transport setting. It's been sometimes 4 weeks. Things have happened and been made and manufactured or sent out or implemented or changed. Has that been reflected also in the EV sector? How have the OEMs, not just the vehicles, but the chargers and all other kinds of equipment associated with electric vehicles, have they reacted in a similar way? Have things changed? How has the market reacted to this sort of unprecedented event? Well, I think, as you say, I mean, COVID is a moment of great disruption, which brings with it significant opportunities as well as threats and difficulties. I think as your contact in Madrid has said, that there is the opportunity now for swift changes, and I think we are seeing some of those. We're seeing we've seen dramatic changes in our own communities with a reduction in traffic, which I think is pushing communities to say, hey, we'd like more of this. We like the clean air, we like the quieter mornings, and I think there's the opportunity for policymakers to respond to that dimension. I think we're seeing on the consumer side, we're seeing more interest in electric vehicles, in cleaner and quieter vehicles. Of course, there are big challenges with that. The manufacturers have had to, shut down factories for periods. But I think what we are seeing on that side of things is that, we're seeing actually, product launches being telescoped into, they're delivering vehicles much more quickly from launch to availability. That may be partly a reflection of the fact that people are always looking at the next model, and is there a better one just around the corner? Which is an interesting challenge for the car makers, because the way this market is going is that there's always something better a little bit down the road. So getting people to buy what you've got available now is more and more of a challenge. Yeah. So again, we're just talking about the UK in this question, but you look on TV advertising at the moment. There's adverts for electric BMWs, electric Minis, electric Jaguars. Do you think that the rise of electric vehicles manufactured by these well-known companies and brands that people trust, is that going to see the take-up in electric vehicles rise? Because people are loyal to their brand. They've had 17 BMWs or whatever, or 7 Minis. Do you think that's going to help? So people aren't looking at Tesla as a brand they may not particularly like for whatever reason, but they're looking at famous brands sort of picking up the mantle, if you like, if that can be possible. Yeah, I think that's right, and I think we are seeing significantly increased activity and messaging around electric vehicles and electric vehicle use from the mainstream manufacturers. But they are under enormous pressure from the insurgent companies to well, on the competitive side and also on the policy side, they have to meet, increasingly stringent European regulations and a lot of national regulations. And it's pretty obvious the way the market's going. So it's no surprise, I think, that they're, we're seeing an increasing focus, and that is being reflected already. And certainly, particularly in the UK earlier this year, we've seen, plug-in vehicle sales approaching 10% of the market in the, in one or two of the lockdown months. Yes, the incumbent companies are under huge pressure to react, and I think we're seeing that they are.
Okay. The one thing I always hark, every time I talk about electric vehicles, I hark back to this. So obviously several years ago now, the Norwegian government were offering incentives. If you bought an electric vehicle, they would pay for half of it. Very generous thing. And for that next year or 2 years, I think it was that Tesla Model S was the biggest selling car in Norway, unsurprisingly. Are other governments around Europe going to follow suit? Because as far as I can see, there's always incentives, but nobody's really, that I've seen, has offered an incentive quite that good, and therefore the uptake in electric vehicle sales has never been quite that good either.
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, Norway is a very specific case. I mean, it's a rich country. I think it's a challenge for other countries in Europe to offer incentives on the scale that Norway has. But we're seeing a whole range of different both sticks and carrots. And if we're going to meet the objectives that we need to meet in order to achieve net zero, we've net zero target now, of course, in the UK, and increasingly that's happening elsewhere in other countries of the world. If we're going to meet the net zero target, then we are going to need better incentives and also tougher sticks. Yeah, yes, the sticks is important bit, isn't it? So in terms of technology and new technology, obviously electric vehicles are still a novelty to a lot of people. It's an innovative industry, innovative sector. You come across companies that do all kinds of clever things involved in the electric vehicle sector. So over the next couple of years, what do you think, or how do you see the electric vehicle market changing and shifting? Obviously, between now and 5 years ago, it's picked up hugely. Can that momentum be maintained even in these COVID times? My personal view is that it can. I think all the evidence is pointing to the fact that, if anything, there's going to be an acceleration rather than a slowdown. The companies, particularly the incumbent companies, are under huge pressure to deliver, as we discussed earlier. We're seeing a lot of evidence of sort of consolidation in the market, companies getting together on particularly on R&D, on different types of innovation. Just this week, we've seen a new development in the UK with the introduction of Zap Pay, which is a way to make the charging for electric vehicle charge points interoperable. So it's if we can make that really work, that's going to be a great benefit to consumers, motorists going from one company's charge point to another to make it much easier. We're seeing progress in interoperability. The Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, we're working very much at the interface between the energy sector and the vehicle sector, and we're looking at the potential benefits that this surge in electric vehicles can have in terms of balancing the grid. The benefits of the huge amount of energy storage capability in battery vehicles as the market grows is a great complement to the renewable energy supply, which we want to see and are seeing more of in terms of balancing when we get the supply when the demand is required. So LOWCVP is working very closely at the interface, and there's huge potential there, and I think we're seeing a massive surge of interest in the possibilities that can create. Great points, thanks for that, Neil. So if you want to know more about LOWCVP, their website is lowcvp.org.uk, and as the website says, LOWCVP is all about connecting, collaborating and influencing. So please do contact Neil, find out more, get involved, and hopefully the take-up of electric vehicles or low carbon vehicles will continue despite
the bizarre things that we're experiencing on a daily basis all across the world. So, Neil, thanks for your time, and hopefully we'll get to see each other soon. Thank you.
Nice to see you. Thanks a lot.
And now I've been joined by Robert Evans. Robert is the CEO of CENEX. Now, if you're not familiar with CENEX, Robert, you can explain exactly what CENEX is and does and why we're talking.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So CENEX is a kind of research organization and does some consultancy work as well. So we've 15 years old, and we've been focused for our existence on low carbon vehicles. So we've been part of the journey of electric vehicles, future technologies like hydrogen fuel cells, and effectively, how do we decarbonize road transport? And we sit between the kind of laboratory and technology development folk and the early users. So we help move the technology from the laboratory into the marketplace through demonstration and supporting early stages of market development. And once the vehicles are there and the infrastructure is there and everything is straightforward, then we move on. We're moving always to what's the next difficult thing to crack, what's the next bit of new technology that can help move the market forward.
So in terms of COVID-19, we can't escape talking about this bizarre year we're having, or maybe even longer, who knows. How has COVID-19 impacted upon what you're doing? How has it affected what you as CENEX are able to do?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed picture, really, because we're in this world of decarbonisation and targeting net zero. And when COVID hit, it obviously sort of affected very directly those that are business to consumer kind of organisations. And so that, none of us were getting out and about. None of us were confident enough to be necessarily buying new cars or other things like that. So in terms of the research areas, a lot of projects were ongoing, and there was plenty of interest for more projects. So the decarbonisation net zero agenda isn't going away, and in fact, COVID has sort of highlighted the importance of electric vehicles, that they are the future, and a lot of emphasis, so ongoing emphasis of people wanting to do new research projects, wanting to look at new ideas. It has probably affected the mainstream car companies most, in the sense that they've had a situation where the sales have basically dried up for a period, and now they're beginning to recover. So the car companies used to things being highly cyclical, and they have cost-cutting manuals, and they know when they really have to restrict the costs and expenditure, so for cash flow purposes. So they tend to have shrunk back their activities in part, and I feel for the folk there, because they're still having to do an awful lot of work, but they're not necessarily able to add resources or take on new R&D projects. But we work a lot with some of the smaller companies that are trying to introduce, the entrepreneurial companies trying to introduce tech into the market, and so they're particularly trying to press forward, and I guess they're using the research space to in part to keep resources on board. Some have furloughed, but others have a number of staff, but others have put their staff into research projects, while maybe more commercial work hasn't been necessarily as forthcoming. But the fundamentals still seem to be very much around net zero is going to happen, and those that don't invest will be behind in a competitive space versus those that do. So we've been very busy through this process, and sometimes I feel guilty because I appreciate that many people have been furloughed. But from my side, my team being busy, occupied, doing productive things, I'm very happy for that.
Well, that's a good thing. I'm just thinking that, and I've mentioned this on this podcast, that sales of recreational vehicles in the US have gone up in the last 6 months, where people are not going on expensive holidays to Barbados or whatever. They're spending that money on a recreational vehicle. Have sales of electric vehicles have suffered as much as fossil fuel vehicles? If you're buying an electric vehicle, there has to be more thought goes into it, of how you charge it and all that kind of stuff. I live in a terraced house. I cannot have an electric vehicle because I can't plug it in. I would strangle people as they, or garrot them as they walk past my house if they're hit by the cable. So I know new flats and apartment blocks that are built in Britain these days, you have to have a certain number of charging points. There's certainly more charging points in the town I live in. But said more thought goes into buying electric vehicles. Have you been able to use this sort of time of everyone's been at home to sort of press home the idea of just how much benefits to society electric vehicles and low carbon vehicles can be?
Well, there's several different things to say here. First one was that when the sales of cars of all types started to reduce in number quite dramatically with COVID effects and people not being able to get into the showrooms and the like, I mean, still EV sales were pushing through at a higher rate, maybe because many of those vehicles were on long delivery times and they'd already been ordered well before that. So you got some early reporting of, the EV sales going up and everything else going dramatically down. As we've all been in the early phases in particular of lockdown and seen the kind of air quality improve and the feeling of life is better without a massive congestion and pollution, then I think that attracted a lot of attention towards EVs and people have had more time to think about their purchase. And if you look at the television adverts, they're very strongly dominated now towards the EV product. So we're heading to a point with the car industry where there's credits coming through in terms of the fleet averages, and so they're particularly keen to have strong sales on the EV side, and they've got new product. Those are the exciting new products that are coming through, are the EV products. So we're seeing that now we've passed, although the market is depressed, so you'd need a lot of time to say, well, what is an equalized out market? The EVs have passed in terms of new car sales quite an important point, which is the kind of 5% level. So having been in this space for 15 years and, the first real EV products coming through with the Leaf in 2008, from the e-mobility community, passing 5% was a significant point, and that's been passed, and the products are there. It's not just one or two or so, and there's pretty much something for everyone with competition across all of the different brands. So, and it's some very exciting products. So the conventional product to me does not feel as exciting as the EV product. And I think folk are understanding that the consumers out there, as well as the fleet purchasers, are understanding actually this makes a lot of sense. And government's done some clever things. I think the benefit in kind and the company car benefits in particular. So the tax benefit from an EV now is really quite marked. And we've always known that the company car market is an important contributor. So these things are all getting the arrows pointing in the right direction to favour EVs. And you will always have progress elsewhere. But there's been a trend in general against declining diesel. And as people are moving away from diesel and concerned about being restricted by ultra low emission zones or similar, then they really are in a situation of, do I go back to a petrol model or do I go to an electric model? And the electric models are looking very attractive, and the longer range of the products jump in range from what was a decade ago of 80 miles range is now over 230 or so. I have a Model 3 Tesla, and I didn't choose the super long range option. I had the one, but the standard, what is their standard range. But that makes EV ownership entirely practical. So these new vehicles coming through are definitely giving range to the choice. I think the affordability particularly is they hold high residuals, some of them, so, and leasing. So the market is moving in a positive direction. COVID has dipped the market overall, but EVs have had a slightly better position, but it is as a percentage of a quite depressed market. So I think to really truly know where we are, we need a longer, we need the recovery to come through to say, what is the effect. Exciting times in this space, very exciting times to be involved in motor industry innovation.
Indeed. Perfect. Robert, thanks for your time. Thank you. Cheers.
Just a quick translation for you there. We heard the word furlough mentioned, and that's a term you might not be familiar with. It's the process of someone whose job has been put on hold beyond their control because of a COVID lockdown, continuing to be employed, but a proportion of their salary has been paid by the government. And the whole idea is they can restart when they can. So this affects people in shops or restaurants that have been shut down by lockdown, for example. And hopefully furlough will not be a word we'll need to know long into the future. So that was Kevin Boris there talking to Neil and Robert. And I'm pleased to say Kevin joins me now. Kevin, let's go back to the beginning of our podcast and an interesting idea from Margaret Bell that we should be thinking about rationing transport for the good of the environment. Now, I have to admit, I'm not really very comfortable with that idea, but given most people did what they were told when it comes to COVID, do you actually think that's a possibility?
I think it probably is. That there has to be, I'm going to coin a phrase here, there has to be a sustainability payoff, doesn't there? That you give up something for something else. The average man in the street will give up something or exchange something if they get something in return. So I think maybe people would say, okay, well, I will work at home. I won't go out. I won't do this. I won't do that if I get something back. I don't think people are willing to give up a modicum of freedom or of liberty or whatever for getting nothing in return. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's how Margaret is looking at it. And the idea that in terms of carbon footprint of putting especially in the working at home during the winter, it's going to, your house needs to be heated for 24 hours a day rather than 8 or 10. That's going to change how we look at sustainability and environmental damage we're all doing to the planet.
And I think the key thing here is that I really don't think it will fly if it's unilateral. If one country, so say here we are, both of us in Great Britain, if Britain decided we would ration transport, I don't think people would put up with it if they're looking at other parts of the world that aren't, and people are just carrying on and, building more roads, flying around all the time, etc. So if the transport emissions are going to change, it's going to have to be on a global discussion to not only find the solutions, but also make sure that you're not impinging on people's freedoms at the same time, which I guess takes us on to your conversations with Neil and Robert, which is rather than saying no travel, obviously what really we need to focus our mind on is sustainable and environmentally friendly travel.
Yeah, I think we use this phrase of the word smart all the time. It's smarter, it's traveling smarter. So when you do travel, when you have to travel, you travel in a more smart way, because again, I'm not imposing my own thoughts on the general public of Europe, but I think the whole society as we are at the moment is what's in it for me, and if he's got that, why can't I have it? That's what I think. That's how people generally think, and it's not a bad thing specifically, but in terms of transport, making it sustainable and making it environmentally friendly, then there has to be a reboot in the way we think, and maybe COVID-19 is the opportunity to do that.
Well, you've come to the right place, listener, for hearing some really interesting thoughts that we've had from Margaret, Neil and Robert. That's Kevin Boris. He's my colleague on these Inside Intertraffics, and he'll join me for the next one next month. But for now, that's it. Don't forget our connectivity webinar on the 29th of September, where hopefully all connections will stay up so we can bring you all the interesting discussion on that. You can sign up at intertraffic.com, and I'll catch you for another Inside Intertraffic with Kevin very soon. Bye for now.
Inside Intertraffic is produced and presented by Paul Hutton and is the official podcast of Intertraffic.